We are honored to have Professor Cotler, who does not need much introduction in our community. He is a renowned human rights champion in the world, currently teaching at McGill University. In his long career in public service, he served as the Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada, a member of Parliament. He's a longtime friend and supporter of Citizen Power Initiative for China. Professor Cotler has played and continues to play a key role in shaping Canadian human rights policy. The future of this policy will help to determine how the free world should respond to CCP's aggression. Let's hear Professor Cotler's assessment on this subject. Please, Professor Cotler.
Thank you very much for those kind words of introduction, and I'm delighted to participate in the common cause which brings us together today, which I would call the struggle for human rights and human dignity in Xi Jinping's China as part of the larger struggle for human rights and human dignity in our time. I want to commend Dr. Yang Jian Li and the Citizen Power Initiative and all those involved in this initiative for organizing this timely and significant forum. Indeed, a forum that is taking place at a moment of urgency in our human condition. For we are witnessing, as we are meeting today, not only a global COVID pandemic, which would be bad enough, but a global political pandemic characterized by a resurgent global authoritarianism, of which Xi Jinping's China and the CCP are message and metaphor, and where the CCP is engaged as we meet in a multi-pronged assault on the international legal democratic order, including, and this is an audience which is well-versed, so I will actually share these panoply of assaults in a series of one-liners. The first, the targeting of what the CCP has called the 5 poisons, the mass atrocities against the Uyghurs, of which I will speak more later, the national security legislation in Hong Kong, constituting a frontal assault on the rule of law, a standing breach of an international treaty, the UK-Sino Treaty, the criminalization of fundamental freedoms in the basic law under that treaty, the assault not only on the democratic order, but on democracy itself in Hong Kong, the criminalization, even in an extraterritorial way, of those outside Hong Kong who would purport to support it, as they have a right to do that which is happening in Hong Kong, the whole constituting, in effect, itself a standing threat to the international order. And it doesn't stop there. We have also the prosecution and persecution of the Falun Gong. We are now into the 22nd year of what the CCP called the eradication campaign against the Falun Gong, which is intensified yet again in recent months. And we know this has included the illegal harvesting and pillaging of organs, of which in an hour there will be another webinar respecting the decisions of the China Human Rights Tribunal into what it called crimes against humanity in this illegal harvesting of organs of the Falun Gong and also of the Uyghurs. The repression for decades now of Tibetans and their cultural, religious, and fundamental human rights, and the standing threat to Taiwan and the Taiwanese, of which we've also just heard. And here too, it doesn't end there. We're witnessing also a massive assault on media freedom, where the CCP, and this is not as well known as it deserves to be, jails more journalists than any other country in the world today. where the suppression of information, of media freedom, the arrest and disappearances of doctors and dissidents, of journalists and human rights defenders contributed to the spread of the COVID pandemic, which the CCP, in a campaign of foreign disinformation, then proceeded to blame on the US or Italy and others, but never assumed responsibility themselves. And where this resurgent authoritarianism has intensified under the cover of the pandemic, the whole underpinned as well by a pandemic of impunity, all of which is backdrop to my central theme today, and that is the mass atrocities against the Uyghurs, the crimes against humanity, which really now encompasses the crime of crimes, namely acts constitutive of genocide against the Uyghurs. In speaking about these unspeakable atrocities targeting the Uyghurs and other Turkic Muslims in the Xinjiang region of China, I'm reminded of the words of Elie Wiesel, and reference was made to him earlier today, Nobel Peace Prize laureate and conscience of humanity, who said, and I quote, that silence in the face of evil is complicity with evil itself. And that, as he would remind us again and again, indifference always means coming down on the side of the victimizer, not on the side of the victim. These words underpinned my testimony recently to a 2-day Canadian parliamentary inquiry into the plight of the Uyghurs. In my testimony before the parliamentary inquiry, which, as it happened, was taking place in the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, the most brutal extermination camp of the 20th century, reminding us of horrors too terrible to be believed, but not too terrible to have happened. I was haunted because just before my testimony, I saw chilling footage, which I viewed, as I said, just prior to my testimony, of Uyghurs, heads shaven, blindfolded, shackled, and herded onto trains headed for concentration camps. I do not make any analogies with the Holocaust, but the graphic videos against the backdrop of what was happening were painfully evocative. The Holocaust and the genocides that followed from Rwanda to Srebrenica to Darfur to Myanmar were unspeakable, not only because of the horrors, but because of these genocides were preventable. Nobody could say we did not know. We knew, but we did not act. And we know now and must act as Beijing's mass atrocities as we meet against the Uyghurs constitute the following. And these mass atrocities are, in my view, and in the view of those experts who have testified in this regard before the Parliamentary Committee and elsewhere, and where the Canadian Parliamentary Committee, in its unanimous report, itself said that the following acts, which I will identify, constitute acts of genocide under the Genocide Convention. First, mass internment in concentration camps of well over 1 million Uyghur men, women, and children as young as 13 years of age, the largest detention of a minority since the Holocaust, with survivors testifying, as they did before the Parliamentary Committee, of forced enslavement, torture, rape, disappearance, and murder. Second, massive, inhumane, and increasing coercive population controls, including forced sterilizations, abortions, IUD insertions and injections, such that between 2015 and 2018, population growth in the Uyghur areas fell by 84%, the whole violating Article 2D of the Genocide Convention, which prohibits, and I quote, imposing measures intended to prevent births within a group. Third, forcible separation of more than 500,000 Uyghur children from their families. Fourth, state orchestrated incitement to genocide, where the CCP indicts what they call Uyghur religious extremism, quote unquote, characterize it all as a malignant tumor, which must be eradicated, and repeatedly issues orders to, quote, round up everyone, show absolutely no mercy, wipe them out completely, destroy them root and branch, break their roots, and uproot, and I quote again, hidden dangers within hidden dangers, as the Supreme Court of Canada said in upholding the constitutionality of our anti-hate legislation. And they said the Holocaust did not begin in the gas chambers. It began with words. These, as the court put it, are the catastrophic effects of racism. These, as the court put it, are the chilling facts of history. And we are witnessing a state-orchestrated incitement to hate and genocide targeting the Uyghurs. Fifth is a massive surveillance state underpinning what has been called the world's most technologically sophisticated genocide, as Yonah Diamond, the legal advisor to our Raul Wallenberg Center, and Rehan Asad, a senior fellow at our center, put it in a Foreign Policy magazine article. The surveillance permeates every aspect of life in Xinjiang, with closed circuit televisions, artificial intelligence, facial recognition, and biometric data, all deployed to track every movement, every communication, and generate lists of quote unquote suspects for detention. And finally, massive state orchestrated assaults on Uyghur memory, religion, culture, language, and identity. At least 65% of all mosques in Xinjiang have been completely demolished or damaged, with others converted into commercial spaces. And so the question, what can we do? For we need not only to unmask and expose these crimes against humanity, we need to act. We need to secure justice for the victims and accountability for the human rights violators. Let me just identify, by way of summary, a list of initiatives that can be taken, need to be taken, and should be taken. First, the UN Secretary General should appoint a special envoy or other independent international investigative mechanism with unfettered access to the Xinjiang region. Second, the US Congress and other parliaments like the Canadian Parliament should engage in their own respective inquiries and make determinations that these crimes against humanity effectively constitute acts of genocide. And here I would like to say that I am a co-chair of the Interparliamentary Alliance on China, which brings together hundreds of parliamentarians from over 20 parliaments, and the list is growing, and we are meeting again later today. But the first issue that we took up were the issue of crimes against humanity against the Uyghurs. Third, the US, Canada, and the international community should invoke and implement the responsibility to protect doctrine, committing the international community to intervene, as the doctrine says, and we are now on the 15th anniversary of the adoption of this doctrine, that wherever crimes against humanity, war crimes, or, God forbid, genocide is being committed in any particular country, and the government of that country is unable or unwilling to do anything about it, or worse, that the government in that country is the author of that genocide, as is happening and now in the Xinjiang region in China, then there is a responsibility with respect to the international community to intervene and protect the innocent targets of those mass atrocities. Number 4, other nations must impose what are known as Magnitsky justice sanctions targeted at individual human rights violators in the Xinjiang region, as the US has done, where major senior Chinese officials and entities responsible for these crimes will be brought to account. I might add here parenthetically that the Interparliamentary Alliance on China, which I referenced earlier, has called for all its members to do so. Number 6, we must sanction corporations with supply chains linked to Uyghur forced labor and strengthen import mechanisms to prevent products made with forced labor from entering our markets. 7, Governments should conduct reviews to monitor investment in technology companies involved in supporting the pervasive state surveillance of Uyghurs. Aid government should expedite refugee applications of Uyghurs fleeing persecution. In a word, and with this I close, let there be no mistake about it. Silence and indifference in the face of evil will be complicit with evil itself. We have a responsibility to act, and we must act with all deliberate speed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Cotler. We have quite a few questions from the audience, but due to the schedule issue, we have to limit it. I'm going to condense it to two quick questions for you, Professor Cotler. The first question is the big question everyone cares is whether there will be a substantial change in China policy, in human rights policy, when Mr. Biden takes office. In particular, will Canada continues to stand up against China's bullying or give in to it by handling back Meng Wanzhou in exchange for Canadians who are behind bars in China as hostages?
Thank you for those questions. With regard to the assumption of the presidency by President-elect Biden, I think there will be one particular change which will be very important and significant. I think we will be witnessing more of multilateral alliances and concerted approaches by the community of democracies. Regrettably, during President Trump's leadership, very often the United States acted alone and not in concert with its allies. I believe that if we have a concerted involvement or engagement of the community of democracies and beyond, this will amount to an effective mobilization of the international community in that regard. I do want to commend what has taken place thus far and under President Trump's initiatives. I'm referring to the congressional initiatives that I referred to earlier. I'm referring to him calling out the criminality of the CCP, but this needs to be a collective multilateral alliance. I mentioned we have an interparliamentary alliance, Read China. We need an intergovernmental alliance, Read China, because what China is engaged in, or CCP is engaged in, is the targeting of the democracies one by one, the bullying of the democracies one by one, the targeting of Australia, the targeting of Japan, the targeting of Canada, of India, and the like. And so we need to come together as a community of democracies. And that, with regard to the two Michaels that are the products of the hostage diplomacy of Xi Jinping's China, here too. And recently the Canadian government, both the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister, have called out the manner of this hostage diplomacy. And I believe that part of this intergovernmental alliance, along with the interparliamentary alliance, will lend the necessary collective support that hopefully will result not only in the freeing of the two Michaels, but an end to this pattern and policy of hostage diplomacy, as well as political prisoners. I'm representing now for 18 years Dr. Wang Bizang, a Chinese doctor who came to Canada in 1979, received his PhD from McGill University in 1982, decided, as many of you know, that rather than become a practicing doctor, which you would have liked to have done, it was more important to pursue democracy in China. And so he set up the Overseas China Democracy Movement and did this in 1982. Fast forward 20 years later, on a visit to Vietnam, he was abducted by Chinese authorities, brought back to China in a sham trial, tried and convicted without counsel of both the crimes of treason and terrorism, sentenced to life imprisonment in solitary confinement where he continues to languish to this day as we speak. And here, to the beginning of the mobilization, just 2 months ago, 6 former foreign ministers and justice ministers in Canada called for his release. Students at McGill University, the Wallenberg Study Group, have mounted a campaign for his release. And yet this is just one looking glass into one political prisoner, which is a looking glass to this massive authoritarianism that we are witness to in Xi Jinping's China today.
Thank you. One last question. We all applaud the Canadian government's effort to condemn the CCP against Uyghurs and condemn the national security law imposed on Hong Kong and accept Hong Kong, refugees. But also China threatened to retaliate. More likely, they're going to use their economic power leverage to force Canada to change. What do you think would this, if China had this economic sanction, would Canada likely to change?
Well, I think that the point that gets right to the heart of the issue, and that is the China's bullying and seeking to use economic power to bully countries one by one. As we are meeting today, we are on the verge of the European Union adopting Magnitsky sanctions. If that happens, that will add 28 more countries to the 7 that have adopted Magnitsky sanctions. We will then have a critical mass of at least 35 countries that have adopted Magnitsky sanctions, the US and Canada being the first to do so. That critical mass will act as an effective counterpoint to CCP's bullying, because it will have economic resources themselves that will be more than 3.5 times as much as China. So I'm looking forward, and as I say, the adoption of Magnitsky sanctions by the EU is imminent. I trust that it will happen within the next month, and you will see that this will be a game changer. This will be a tipping point in our relationships with the CCP. It will put an end to the bullying.
That's wonderful. Great to hear that. Because of the schedule, we have to move on. For